Hello, everybody, and welcome to Young Guns Live. This is our first attempt at ever doing a live show. Just want to apologize in advance for any technical difficulties. I promise we will try to make this as smooth and run as effectively as possible. We want to thank you guys for joining. Please use the hashtag YoungGunsLive to join in on the conversation. We'll be checking out periodically through what you guys have to say, questions, comments. If they're good, we'll bring them on air. If it's good questions, we'll bring them on, we'll discuss them. If it's stupid comments, I will chuckle about them later as I laugh myself to sleep at your stupidity. So this week's episode, we're talking about really the only big relevant thing in the news, which has been ISIS, Syria, the attacks in Paris, all that. For those of you that don't know, thank you for coming out of your rock. But last week in Paris, there was a deadly attack that claimed the lives of 128 innocent civilians. And whether you want to debate anything about it, all of that aside, the fact is that 128 people lost their lives and well over 300 were injured. And that's the core of it all. So I know there's been a lot of politicizing about it. I know there's been a lot of angry people, and there's been a lot of, this and that. But people died, and it's a really horrible thing, and that's really all that can be said about it. It's not, it's not like Trump said guns could have prevented it. That's crap. That's politicizing it. People going for their own gains. And if you know me, I don't appreciate when people do stuff like that from any side. So with that, we're going to start off by talking a little bit about how the events in Paris got to the point, how all of that kind of came to take place, which obviously it wasn't good. We don't like that. We don't like when we see terrorist organizations out there doing things. So we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about that. If anybody, Stephen, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit on how ISIS came to the point where they are now, came to be with the point where they are now.
Sure. Well, I'm by far no extreme expert on the issue, but what we do know is that ISIS, of course, is an off-branch of Al-Qaeda, who we have been fighting for quite some time now. The issue is that Al-Qaeda was not extreme enough. Al-Qaeda would go after people who did not follow kind of their plans. ISIS goes after everyone. ISIS doesn't care really what religion you are, where you're from. If you're not for their very extreme positions, their very extreme ideology, they're out to kill you. And so ISIS has kind of emerged fairly recently, and it hasn't been made any better by a weak commander-in-chief and a weak kind of U.S. foreign policy. And what we see is that ISIS is this extreme group, and now they are doing these little tests around the world. A lot of commentators have said that the Paris attacks were really a test to see if they could if they could pull off small randomized attacks like this, and turns out they can. And now security threats are all over the globe. Security is being heightened around places like London, Paris, certainly. Germany has put their troops onto the streets for the first time since World War II, even threats to Washington, D.C. and New York. So, some people will say that ISIS is so extreme because people join it because they don't have jobs or economic prosperity, but really this is a movement of radicalization within Islam, and these people are radical Islamist terrorists, and that's what needs to be said. And you see a lot of their recruitment is extremely advanced. They're recruiting via social media. They're recruiting people not just in the Middle East, but in Europe, in the United States. They have said that there are already sleeper cells here in the United States, people ready to attack whenever they need to. They're building up a worldwide Minuteman type of army, and that's what's so concerning about it, especially with their extreme ideology. You put that all together, it's not a good recipe going forward, not just for the Middle East, but also for the entire world.
Yeah, so Benjamin, I'm going to give you a chance to talk a little bit on why you believe U.S. foreign policy had a lot to do with the creation and the development of these radical Islamist ideals that have escalated to such a point.
Okay, so first of all, I would just like to say that I don't go to the point of blaming these attacks on ourselves. I think,
Right, yeah.
I
I want to make clear that I wasn't saying that either.
yeah, I think that notion is kind of crazy. Like, you have to assign responsibility to the people who actually do the bad things. But if you look at not even just U.S. foreign policy, but Western foreign policy in general, we, over the last 100 years, have treated the Middle East like an experimentation zone where we can go in and destabilize regimes, starting with the Ottoman Empire, and expecting nothing really to happen from it, or expecting it to improve. And yet every time we've intervened, and I'm not just talking militarily, I'm talking economic sanctions, all these things, every time we've intervened, it's just destabilized things a little bit more. And specifically with the invasion of Iraq in 2003, you can't say, well, because we invaded Iraq, ISIS exists today, but we certainly didn't make it harder for them. We went in and we deposed a secular dictator who was a horrible human being and killed a lot of people, but we went in and deposed him, and then we just took off, and then it created this power vacuum in an incredibly unstable region where even the factions of Muslims that are there don't get along. We have Sunni and Shiite Muslims. They don't get along with each other, let alone the rest of the world. So our intervention certainly hasn't helped.
Yeah, that's an argument that fairly is made by a lot of sides. The one thing I want to say, a lot of it has to do, people are saying, well, the Bush invasion of Iraq and invasion of Afghanistan, that was what all led to this. Others say it was the immediate withdrawal without understanding the repercussions of what it would leave. You mentioned the power vacuum that was left. I think that was a huge, huge part of it. But more importantly, I think what people are missing from all of this is that, and you kind of said it, is it's huge divides between two factions of a religion. And so when secular government isn't there, when government is run by religion, you come into these things and you get these fights, and then it goes outside of government, and it becomes, it starts from outside of government, and the governments just tend to escalate it when they are religiously based, which is
Right.
very, very harmful. Another part that obviously people are talking about is the fact that the U.S. sent weapons to Syrian rebels fighting against
Right.
Bashar al-Assad. The thing that I understand from that is that they argued at the beginning, they were very pro-West. There was a very pro-Western rebel group, the Syrian Free Army, that had asked for help from the United States. The United States said maybe. Took a long time to get to that. By the time we ended up helping them a little bit, it was basically pointless. It didn't really do enough to help. ISIS was already on the rise, taking them over while fighting against the nation of Syria and Bashar al-Assad, his forces. So it got to the point where the whole thing is such a mess, where right now the only people effectively fighting against ISIS, arguably, is the Kurds in Iraq, who we've completely refused to help. So it's one of those things where you can argue that intervention was the issue, but you can also argue that not intervening was an issue. Conrad, I kind of want to get your view on, what can the U.S. do, or what should the U.S. have done, specifically with the Kurds and with the Syrian Free Army, that could have made a difference earlier, so we wouldn't have gotten to the point that we're at now.
Well, I think it's we can always point fingers back at George W. Bush or look, and I'll be the first one to tell you, I like George W. Bush, and I'll be the first one to tell you that he made foreign policy mistakes. Not everything he did was probably, the best thing that could have been done at the time. But hindsight's always 20/20. We in 2015, have the privilege of looking back at what he did in a period of war and saying, well, we can second guess him and say he should have done this, he should have done that. And that's well and good, and we should do that and learn from the mistakes that people make in the past. But as far as we are now, it seems like President Obama has, he leads by talking, not by doing anything else. And the problem is that eventually talking is good, but eventually you have to actually have action. And he drew a red line in Syria and said, if chemical weapons are used, I can't remember exactly what the repercussions he promised would be. The red line was crossed, and he did nothing. So when the world sees that, when ISIS sees that, when terrorists all around the world see that, they see that the United States is weak and that they can do whatever they want. They can walk all over us without doing anything. So I think that is the biggest problem, is a failure to lead, not so much a failure in general in any specific area about, for instance, arming the Kurds or the Free Syrian Army, but I think it's an overall failure of leadership.
Well, I think if I could just add to that real quick, you have a President Obama, campaigned on the idea that we would be ending the war in Iraq, and along with that, of course, he meant ending our kind of intervention in the Middle East, and a lot of people rallied behind that, and they said, yeah, we should get out of there, we've been wasting too many lives. The problem when you campaign on ending a war is that you put yourself in a very tight spot if something changes. You cannot make a promise that you promise on keeping for 8 years because of how much things can change. So when after decades of bombing this region and creating radicals because they look at the United States as this evil force who has been bombing the hell out of them for the past couple of decades, you cannot seriously call this group a JV squad and say that we're going to get out of the Middle East and say that we have no business being there and that American lives should not be shed. And then when you get in a situation where this group is trying to kill us and kill our allies, your solution is airstrikes because you don't actually want to put boots on the ground because that would go against one of your promises. He backed himself into a corner like that, and I think that was probably his first failure, and that was a failure that happened before he even took office.
Yeah, I just want to clarify something, and by clarify I mean throw in my own opinion in there, which obviously I take as fact. You don't have to. I don't think the U.S. bombing or fighting at all in Iraq or in the Middle East is what led to the creation of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any of those groups. I do think it may have led to some of the escalation, but I don't think it was the key contributing factor because it is in their religious beliefs to wage jihad against the infidel. And if you want to look at an example of someone that we're not bombing right now that still wants to kill us, you can look at Iran. We have not fought in Iran. We are not fighting in Iran. Yet Iran still wants to murder Americans. They want to drop a nuke on D.C. So it doesn't really matter whether we intervene there or not. I get what you're saying. I get that the bombings do they give this rallying cry. So I get that.
Right. How easy is it to recruit people when you can turn and say, look at the things that this other country has been doing to us. You should really join our forces and fight back against them. I'm not saying that it created ISIS. I'm not saying that our bombings, is the sole contributor to it, but I think that it certainly motivated a new generation, people who grew up with their hometowns being bombed. It certainly created a resentment in these younger generations.
Yeah, and the kind of key contributing factor to the rise of these things, again, reiterating what Benjamin had talked about earlier, it's leaving this power vacuum. You talked about how Obama campaigned on the premise of we're going to end these wars. The problem is we weren't fighting a war against a specific person or group of people. However, people will put it that way, but you're fighting against terrorism, which isn't ideal. Much like we see racism in America right now, terrorism is not something that can be completely eradicated. It's something that's always going to exist. So the problem is when you leave an area where this has been such an issue and you don't have a plan to deal with it and you don't have a way to make sure that there's a government in place to prevent it from happening again, it happens. And people warned about it for years. They said if we pull out too fast, it's going to leave a vacuum and radicals are going to take its place. And the left said, no, we need to get out of Iraq. It was a bad decision. And nobody's arguing that the war in Iraq was – they're not saying it was done 100% right and we would do it all again exactly the same way, knowing what we know now. Hindsight is 20/20, and so we can look back and say, look, mistakes were made. We would have done it differently. The issue comes then when you leave, despite the advice of your generals and of your leaders, and you decide, well, I'm just going to stick to a campaign promise despite the harm that it's going to cause America. That's when you get into some real big issues. So the issue that we're at now, though, is this attack happens, and we're faced with a few issues. We're faced primarily with, despite what the media will have you think, the Syrian refugees isn't really the big issue. Shocker. the big issue is that there is a radical Islamist group that wants to kill everybody who does not agree with what they agree with, whether it's Americans, whether it's French people. There was a supposedly bombs found outside of a soccer match between Germany and the Netherlands. I'm a huge soccer fan. I was actually going to tune in to that and watch it online, and it got canceled, which it's a shame that this stuff is affecting people around the world. It's not just the United States involved. And so the biggest debate and the hot topic has kind of been, what do we do from here to deal with ISIS? You have a lot of people saying, well, we'll just, either we'll go in there and we'll bomb them and we'll kill every last one of them, or we'll go in and we'll fight, we'll put soldiers on the ground, and we'll go in there and fight, or we'll sit here and keep doing what we're doing because it's working really well. So there's kind of three things that are kind of being discussed. Obviously, the latter is not really working, because if it was working, these kind of attacks wouldn't have happened. Brittany, we'll get you involved here. What do you think should be America's response, and not just America, but the world's response to the terror group that is ISIS? And what do you think the world needs to do to combat them?
At this point, I think this could have been slightly prevented. I think that, we had the intelligence. We could have gone up in there. We're giving the French the intelligence that we have to go and bomb these targets, and why have we not done this yet? ISIS could have been completely silenced or something. Obama went on to say that they were what? What did he say? They were contained? Obviously they were not contained. They attacked the French. The fact that the French are leading this fight is just, why are we not taking control of this?
The argument from the libertarian side, if any of them are listening, that I'm sure they're about to get heavily involved on Twitter. So I encourage you, #YoungGunsLive. Tell me I'm wrong. I'll call you out on air. The argument is, well, why should America get involved? It's not our problem right now. Why are we getting involved in the world?
It's eventually going to be our problem, though. I hate to say it as much as I do, but it's just the matter of time where we experience one of these attacks here on our soil.
Again, because we did experience one of the worst terrorist attacks, I believe the worst terrorist attack to date in 9/11. The only reason I'm saying I believe is because I feel like there may have been something in the past that could have happened. I don't know. I'm not looking up a bunch of stats right now. So I'm just going to go off and say ISIS was the worst. Or not ISIS, 9/11 was the worst. ISIS is the worst.
ISIS is the worst, yes.
Yeah. So actually, since we're talking about possibly an attack on American soil, we just got a question in from Taylor Fox at T_Fox8, asking if we believe America is at an imminent risk of an ISIS attack if we don't respond. What do you guys think about that?
I think ISIS wants us to respond, and they will provoke us as long as it takes to get us to respond. It's the same thing that happened during World War II. We didn't respond until we were bombed in Pearl Harbor. So yes, I think, God forbid it happens here. Hopefully we can foil any plans that come up, but I think they do.
I think we're at an imminent risk of an attack whether we respond or not. That's the thing with dealing with these groups is, they do what they're going to do, and they may change their plans based on our response, but I think we're always at an imminent attack if someone's following the jihad. It's just the nature of what it is.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that I think whether we decide to get involved or not, more involved, I should say, over in Syria and Iraq with fighting ISIS, I do think that we're going to have the risk of an imminent attack, which is very scary. I tweeted something the morning after, and it's really true. After 9/11, I didn't really understand. I was too young to understand the fear of an attack happening. And that was an attack already on American soil. Right. But I didn't understand the fear. When it happened, I was at the Sunshine Summit, and I spent the next day at a summit where presidential candidates were speaking. So you can imagine my personal fear of, holy crap, something could happen here. The second day, there was no Secret Service security. There were no metal detectors to get in. It was just TSA asking you to empty your pockets, check your bag, and you could walk in. So it was a little nerve-wracking. and I genuinely felt the fear of something could happen, and something could happen here, something could happen in the United States, and I'm genuinely worried about it. And so it's something that I've become worried about, and I'm still worried about, because ISIS has said we're going to do something, and our country is not responding in a way that says, no, you're not. If somebody says, you know, I'm going to punch you in the face, your typical response is not going to be, go ahead. It's no big deal. Your response is going to be, no, you're not. Or if they come and try to punch you in the face, you're going to punch them back harder. Of course, if you live in a southern state, you'll probably just pull out a gun.
Parents have gone out and started buying. It's not funny. I'm sorry. They started buying guns, and they started like stocking up in case something happens. I think that's so sad and truly terrifying, and it's just.
Well, here's the question, Kyle. I know you called out libertarians, and it's fine. But as the resident, you know, somewhat of a libertarian, let me just interject here and say, for me, it's not so much a question of if we should go to war with ISIS. It's a question of, is the United States ready to go to war with anyone right now? The last time the United States declared war was in 1941. That was World War II. Since then, we haven't had actual declared wars. They've all been conflicts. And that's because World War II was the last war that Americans were expressly invested in a wartime effort. Women went to work in factories. Men went off and signed up for the military. Today, recent polls that come out, the average say 60% of Americans would like to see more airstrikes happen. We know airstrikes aren't effective. 30% say that we should have boots on the ground, and 10% are either unknown or say that we should support allies. So the issue is, you know, if we're going to go to war, first of all, the president has to go to Congress. And I'm not comfortable with President Obama being our commander-in-chief if we're going to go to war with ISIS, essentially, or especially because he's not expressly against ISIS. He's somewhat of a sympathizer to those people over there. But here's the thing, there's no formal war plan. The president doesn't know how to defeat ISIS. Our military advisors seemingly don't know how to defeat ISIS, and the country isn't ready. I think we've grown up in an era where a Paris attack happens, and so we change our Facebook profile picture, but we're not actually ready to go sign up for the service. And, you know, granted, I'm guilty of that too. You don't see me going down to the Marines sign-up office and doing it, but that's the way we are now. We've become so numb to war that we just see it as something that's ongoing. We haven't lived in peace. And what I'm concerned about is if we are going to make the extremely tough and dangerous decision to send American troops to the Middle East to fight people, we have to make sure that if anyone dies, they're dying with a purpose and they're dying with a mission. And right now, if we were to go over there and fight them, there's no unified purpose. There's no unified mission. Our allies, you know, in World War II, we were successful because of the Allied powers. We don't have the same coalition that we had back then, and we certainly don't have the same commitment to defeating evil that we had back then, because nowadays, you know, next week people are going to forget that the Paris attacks even happened. And it's really sad, but that's the reality of the situation. And I think, you know, if we're going to go to war, we need a new commander-in-chief. And quite honestly, I can't think of anyone in the 2016 race that I would even be comfortable with being commander-in-chief. And again, that's a sad reality. But we lack, I think, the mentality to go to war right now. And quite honestly, without an attack, and I know this gets people angry, but I say without an attack on us, we lack the validity, the authority to go in and start fighting these people.
I agree.
You said that there's not a united cause. I will disagree with you on that. The united cause is obviously wiping out this force of evil that we've seen there. However, I agree with. I get the point you were trying to make. I just want to clarify.
How many people actually want to go to war? And by war, I mean like a real war. That's what people aren't united in that opinion.
Right. People are united in what they want the outcome to be. They're not united in how they want to get to that point. Which is interesting. I think the big thing, though, that you kind of mentioned, you talked about how we don't have the Allied powers, you know, we don't have that unified force. I think the biggest thing is because we don't have the same kind of leaders that were around back then. There isn't a Winston Churchill. FDR may not have been the greatest domestic president, but the way he handled the situations of World War II was very excellent. And the way that was all done, you have to give a lot of credit where it's due. The leaders of the French resistance were huge. The evil that we were fighting was much more visible, much more aggressive, because war was different. Fighting was different. The Nazis weren't going into cities and blowing themselves up while hiding among the people. They were coming in full armor, or full uniform in armored tanks, marching into cities and burning everything on their way. And because ISIS isn't doing that, it's like we don't have this, the argument is, oh, we're not fighting an actual army, we're just fighting a group of random people, when in reality it's a very large group of people, and it's a very dangerous group of people that is more effective than the Nazis were, because they can hide with people in plain sight every day, come out of nowhere, blow themselves up, take tons of lives with them, and there's almost nothing you can do to stop them unless you're finding ways to catch that, which even now we're talking about, in our country, we shouldn't be doing those things. And obviously I get those arguments. I get that there's civil liberty arguments, but there's things that you have to do. We're not fighting a conventional war. We're not fighting a conventional enemy. So the response, the understanding, none of that is going to be conventional. It's going to take unconventional leadership. It's going to take unconventional support. The country as a whole is going to have to come to a point where they can rally around the cause and the idea of defeating ISIS. The only issue is, like you were saying, they're not united in how we're going to do it. Everyone just wants to see the same outcome. I'm interested to hear what you guys think, though, of... we'll go to Conrad. We'll get you back involved in this. What do you think should be the immediate response to ISIS? But more importantly, how do you think... or what's your ideal way that we would get people on board with this? Because like Stephen was saying, we don't have an organized effort. So how would we go about getting that?
I think the key problem is, again, it's a failure of leadership, because we don't have, and I hate to point back to Ronald Reagan, but I mean, Ronald Reagan had the courage, had the, I guess, guts, if you will, to go stand in front of the Berlin Wall and say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Right now, we have a president that says, don't cross that line, and then when somebody does cross that line, he's like, oops, I didn't mean don't cross that line. Let me move the line. I didn't really mean to say that. That's the problem right now, and I completely understand why people don't feel inspired to go to war with ISIS or to attack ISIS or to do anything with ISIS, because we have a president that just this week said he was not interested in pursuing any notion of America winning or American leadership. That's the president of the United States that said he is not interested in America winning or American leadership. You have a president like that, how are you going to get the people behind an effort like that? So, I mean, like Stephen said, it's one thing to feel sorry for the Paris victims. It's one thing to want to do something about ISIS. But again, I wouldn't go down and join the military under this commander-in-chief, because at the bottom line, at the end of the day, I don't think he has the best interests of America at heart. I really honestly do not believe that. And unless there was a commander-in-chief in the Oval Office that I really believed had the best interests of America at heart, there's no way that I would go and join the military.
I think the issue, Conrad, is he campaigned as this peaceful kind of new American era of leadership type of guy, and the conditions that he found himself thrown into as president didn't match those, and that's why it's very hard to campaign on foreign policy, and then because when you become president, you start to realize everything that happens. Obama wants to be this person who ushers in a new era of peace, but unfortunately the dadgum world isn't letting him do it, and so he's becoming frustrated, and he thinks that we can defeat ISIS through maybe giving them jobs or through some peaceful negotiations at Camp David, but it's just a different approach that someone like Ronald Reagan or FDR had.
I'm just going to throw an unpopular opinion in here and say that a very effective way to stand against ISIS would be to get out of the way of Russia and get out of the way of Iran, two nations that we are very happy to antagonize as Americans, and two nations who are very much opposed to the rise of ISIS.
But
maybe not the best. Maybe let me just say, I'm not necessarily advocating that, but it's an idea.
No, I've
I'm
heard
not
that idea.
right? It's like,
My concern has always been, can you actually trust the Russians? They don't have the purest of intentions, and also with Iran, not the purest intentions. So I get it. ISIS would probably be defeated, but then it's kind of like turning the page to the next problem we'd have to deal with.
Well,
I'm not saying let's give them money. I'm just saying let's get out of their way.
Here's what would happen if we just get out of the way and let Russia go in, and this is why I'm not totally opposed to it. You're going to see our good friend Vlad riding in, bare-chested, on top of a tank, single-handedly murdering every member of ISIS in the country of Syria. You
Kyle,
think I'm joking?
Older now. He can't do these things.
Okay, then he'll do it with 2 hands.
He does like judo or something like that.
Yeah, no, he would absolutely go in there and do that before our president would even have the time to mention it, while he's busy making videos with BuzzFeed and talking about how Republicans are a bunch of homophobic, xenophobic, racist, and bigots. Look, honestly, I can't stand Vladimir Putin as a leader. I think he's not a good man. He's a bad man. In case you missed that.
Yeah.
But I'm not opposed to him going in. Obviously, not him specifically. But you look at what they were able to do in the Ukraine without being involved. I'd like to see them actually get involved and do something there, because we're not going to do it. But maybe what that does, if we start to see Russia get involved, like you were talking about America finding a unifying cause, and Benjamin talked about how America is really good at antagonizing Russia, and we love to do it. So perhaps it would be, hey, Russia's doing this. We should probably not let them look like the good guy. So we're going to go in, and we're going to win this one. I don't think that would have as much of an effect as I hope. What?
The problem is that ISIS has about $2 billion in reserves. They have a lot of money. Until we cut off where the funding is, we can bomb them as many times as we want. We can even put troops on the ground if we wish. But until we cut off their money and their source of money, and until we literally stop doing all business with any of our allies who are also allies of theirs, because the Middle East is a very complex web of partnerships. Until we do that, there's no use in even bombing them. As I was saying earlier, you want to talk about soldiers dying with a purpose. If we send in troops and someone gets killed, one of them gets killed, as will eventually happen, are they going to be doing that in vain? Because are we going to continue to allow ISIS's funding source to continue to flow into their bank account? That's a much bigger issue that a lot of people aren't looking at right now.
Well, maybe we just have to go in and steal chunks of oil from them.
No.
I like that idea.
Calm
Right?
down.
Chunks of oil to all of the veterans.
We just need to make America great again by defeating ISIS, guys.
We need to make America dope again.
There you go.
I agree.
Oh.
John Kasich for president, everyone.
Oh Lord.
No. We try to keep it a little light here. So one of the issues that's come out from the whole thing in Syria, which is where most of the fighting is taking place, although a lot of it is taking place in Iraq, but the Kurds seem to have a pretty good handle on ISIS over there, which is great. But Syria, a lot of people there have been displaced, and they've left to go to other countries. Interesting little fun fact here. The majority, I'm not going to throw out a number because I will be 100% wrong, but the majority of the refugees that are coming to the United States are actually coming from other countries that they were relocated to. So when we talk about, why won't their neighbors take them in, their neighbors actually were, and then they wanted out to come here. There are multiple reasons, and I don't think it's because they're all terrorists. I think it's genuinely because they realize America is probably one of the better places to be. However, we are dealing with a refugee crisis, one that there is no clear answer to. The left will have you believe President Obama at the White House sent out an email today that basically said we need to let them all in because 0% of the refugees that have come in so far have committed acts of terrorism. I read through the email and almost threw my phone, except I was in the car and didn't want to have to go find my phone on the highway. So I was a little teed off because it's not true. Yes, that's true. 0% of the 2,000 something refugees have come in have committed an act of terror. However, that still does not mean that every single person coming in is automatically A-OK, so we should just open the doors and let everyone in. However, it does also not mean the flip side, that we should just say nobody can come in ever. We're not letting any refugees from Syria come in, no exceptions. What we have to do, and what the right has been saying and the left is misconstruing, is that we need to take a break right now. We need to pause letting in refugees until we can sit down and we can honestly come up with an effective way to vet these people so we know who's coming in, or at least can track them while they're here. But until we can do that, we can't let people in with the risk. Like Marco Rubio said, it's not because we're not compassionate. It's that we just can't. You can't allow people in when there is a risk and you don't have a way to figure out what the risk is. So I'm going to let you guys kind of, we'll kind of discuss our thoughts, your thoughts on what we do with this Syrian refugee thing. What is the approach? And also, if you want to join in on Twitter with this, remember the hashtag YoungGunsLive. We would love to hear your opinion on what we should do with the Syrian refugee crisis, as well as what's going on with the president's views on it, because he's really contradicting public opinion at this point.
Let me just jump in here, not specifically on the what we should do with the refugees or screening or vetting or whatever, but what really disturbs me is the amount of anti-refugee sentiment that is going around out there, because it seems like all over Facebook, all over Twitter, it's like people praising their governors. It's like, yay, my governor's one of the ones that's shutting out the refugees. And it's just like, to me, it's a heartbreaking situation, because obviously our national security comes first. It has to come first before humanitarian aid that we provide to other countries, because keeping us safe is the most important thing. But at the same time, I don't want everybody to be out there rejoicing that we have to send these poor people back, because you see that there's a lot of people who have been displaced by war, and it's just like all of a sudden America has become, I think somebody said, Fortress America, where we want to build big giant walls around our borders and shut everybody out. That's never been what America has been about. It's always been about, the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Again, I'm not saying that we should just open the floodgates and let all the refugees in. But if we do have to keep them out for security reasons, it shouldn't be something that we're all bragging about.
Yeah, the fact that people are bragging about, we're going to be this country that's going to build huge walls and we're not going to let people in unless it's the right people. The anti-refugee sentiment is disturbing, and it's a very small percentage of people that gets portrayed by the media as the large amount of people.
They get a lot of... They get a big microphone.
Yeah, well, it's the dumbest
kind
who
of like
often
those people
speak
with
the
the Starbucks cups, there were like two of them complaining, and all of a sudden all Christians were freaking out. No, this is interesting because my governor, Governor Greg Abbott, sweet man, but unfortunately extremely misguided, because he said that Texas would not participate in any government program that would bring refugees into the state. And I'm thinking, last time I checked, Governor, they're not going to really consult you about that. They should, probably, but they're not going to, and you don't really have the authority to turn refugees away. And plus, let's say they drop them off in Montana, which, by the way, God bless you if you get dropped off in Montana. I guess it's better than where you came from. But what's going to keep you from going down to any of these states that have banned refugees? Trump today says that he wants to put an ID or might support an ID for Muslims in America. This would probably include the Syrian refugees. So
why don't we just make them pin yellow crescents on their shirts every day?
But don't give them any ideas. I think, and I talked about this on my podcast, which was put up this morning, the Stephen Perkins program, finally hipster approved. I'm very excited about that. But I talked about this morning, I have a conflict as someone who, obviously, America has this strong tradition of compassion, like you said, Conrad, and you're completely correct. There is now this anti-refugee sentiment, and it's very heartbreaking. But then there's also I get frustrated when I see people who don't understand the threat. I saw a meme the other day that said there's a bowl of 100 M&Ms, 10 of them are poisoned. I bet you a bleeding heart liberal would scoop up a handful regardless. I I think, and I'm not a CIA or FBI operative. I wish I was. That'd be cool. But I am not in the position to really know about our vetting technology. But I have a pretty strong suspicion that we are able to look at and vet and kind of do background searches on at least some of these people. Maybe not 100,000 refugees, but at least some of them. And I think that we should be doing as many as we can and allowing as many people as we can properly vet to come into the country. But this is obviously, I mean, this is something I don't have an answer to, and I said that on my podcast, and I'll say it here, and I don't think anyone has an answer. But what is not the answer is saying that all of these refugees are terrorists, that we should turn them all away, and that we should completely close our borders. Even France, after these attacks, France has said that they will now be taking in refugees. I think that's powerful.
Yeah. Speaking really quick about the vetting process, one of the things that's come out, and Congress is currently working, the House voted to pass some new legislation talking about the process, figuring out how we can do it. It is really hard to vet people coming from a country that's been completely torn up by war, because the backgrounds in the last 5 years, everything was left behind. You don't pack up and leave your country escaping death and, oh, let me grab my passport. It's just not the first thought. So there's that. The other part of it is I want to bring up that a few different candidates, I know Jeb Bush is one of them, but a few of the Republican candidates for president brought up a possible way to vet as, well, why don't we do a religion test, figure out who's Christian, because Christians aren't the terrorists. I want to let Conrad kind of get into this as our residential social conservative, but before I do that, I just want to say that's the issue with that is that, yes, it's right, there aren't terrorist Christians among these people. However, the question I kind of want to pose to you, Conrad, is that right? I mean, is that something we can even discuss, and is that appropriate? But I'll let Neo Conrad talk about that.
Neo Conrad.
Yeah, thank you to Marquise Young for dubbing me with that. But yeah, the libertarians always accuse me of being a neocon, which I probably am. So I'll just
you are.
I'll be
Hillary Clinton agree on everything.
but yeah, we always have interesting discussions, and I think it's good because if there's too many on the neocon side, it's not, and there's not enough libertarians, you don't have the balance. So I think it's good to have multiple different takes on the issue.
No, we need less libertarians.
No.
I didn't say we need more libertarians. I said we.
Just kidding.
I think
a bunch of libertarians hating on me on Twitter. Just watch.
I'm about to right now. I'm about to go to stuff. I'm going to send Rand Paul memes your way.
Oh, boy.
By the way,
I know.
Benjamin has an unlimited supply of Rand Paul memes. I promise. Get into any conversation, Rand Paul memes will come out. So, just warning you there. Back to what we were actually supposed to be talking about, being the refugee crisis. I think, it's hard for us to say, well, we should only let Christians in because, what's to stop terrorists from saying, coming to the border and saying, oh, of course I'm a Christian. It's very easy to pretend to be a Christian, and it's not like the border patrol or the immigration agency is going to be able to read their mind. So I think it's, plus to me that's slightly hypocritical. I understand where they're coming from and saying, well, the Christians are the ones facing religious persecution, and therefore they should be the ones that are, accommodated more than the rest. But at the same time, you have to remember that ISIS is also slaughtering and killing moderate Muslims who are not going along with their mission of jihad. So I think you have to remember it's not just Christians that are running away from ISIS. There are plenty of Muslims too. And I think this is interesting. If I'll just pull up this quote, there's a quote from the Holocaust Museum, and it was from a Lutheran minister in Nazi Germany, and he said that first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So I think that shows that, a lot of times we tend to only care about people that are, the same as us, and we say, well,
Right.
it doesn't matter if the moderate Muslims are getting slaughtered because we're not Muslims, we only care about Christians. But at the end of the day, we are all humans. We are all God's children, if you will, on this earth. And for us to say that we're just not going to care about somebody because they're different to us and their situation doesn't affect us, I think is incredibly hypocritical.
Absolutely. Yeah, it shouldn't. The idea of, well, the Christians are more important because we're Christians, it's typically the people that are saying we should let them in for that. It's very hypocritical, and it also goes against our Constitution. We aren't a theocracy. They are escaping theocracy. So that's kind of important. One thing I do want to point out, though, I'm not sure how many of you guys keep up to date with Steven Crowder, with his stuff.
Oh, yeah.
He's hysterical, but he tweeted something today. It was a photo. He said, "Here's the test I would give them to let them in." This isn't me agreeing with this or disagreeing with this, whatever. It's just really funny. It was a drawn picture of Muhammad, and it said Muhammad with an arrow pointing to him, and then it had another arrow pointing to him, and it says, "This guy is bad," or something like that, or "bad guy." And it's like, what we do is we're going to ask them to draw this, and if they do, we know they're not radical Islamists. And if you ask them to draw and they try to blow you up, they are radical Islamists.
Simple enough.
I think that works, and I think it would cost a lot less money than anything else the country would want to do.
Okay, and now you've put me in the position of arguing in defense of Muslims, which is not a comfortable position.
In case anyone can see it.
Yeah, Brittany, is the libertarian horde has descended on your Twitter. I apologize. I really think that we should respect other religions as much as possible. Obviously not respect religions when they're using their religion to blow up people and shoot people hostages in a theater in cold blood. Don't get me wrong. But, if and I may be wrong here, so I'm sure I'll hear from somebody of the Muslim faith later to correct me on this, but if I'm not wrong, it is considered blasphemy for anyone who is a Muslim, radical or not, to draw a picture of Muhammad. And to me, again, that's discriminating because we're saying we're not going to let anyone who's a Muslim in, or at least a practicing Muslim. You have the same thing with Orthodox Jews, that there's some foods that they will not eat, there's some things that they will not wear. So to me, I understand the humor in it, and if he was joking, that's fine. But at the end of the day, we have to be respectful of everybody's customs and traditions.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was why I was saying I'm not endorsing that. I was just kind of mentioning that there was something funny on the internet that is to get a lot of opinions in the I think it's also key. It's very important to understand. Trump said something about, maybe we should just close all the mosques because from what I have read, France is cracking down on the radical Islamist teachings in France, and they're shutting down mosques that are teaching radical Islamic principles. So there's a difference between shutting down all mosques and shutting down ones that are teaching people to blow people up. But it is an issue of religious liberty. We aren't a country of only Christians. We're a country of every religion, to the point where a woman is allowed to take a picture with a pot on top of her head because she's a Pastafarian. So, I mean, religious liberty is a pretty big thing.
What?
Pastafarianism. Have you
Yeah.
not heard of it?
No.
Oh, you're missing out.
It's like
Like threw me
Rastafari
completely off guard there.
with a P at the front.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me Google that.
But that's the point. I mean, it's a country of religious freedoms and religious liberties, and so for us to say because you're a different religion, we're going to distrust you and not allow you in, or allow you in based on a certain religion, it's incredibly hypocritical. And more importantly than just the constitutional side, if we're going to claim to be Christians and then say we're not going to allow anyone but Christians in, that goes against every basis of faith that we believe in, because the gospel is not just meant for people that already believe. That's one of the things I've been talking about with the whole refugee thing. I've been tweeting a lot about is that, people have said, for example, well, there's veterans that are homeless in our country. We need to take care of them first. Because you're right, Jesus said in the Bible, take care of your own people before you take care of anyone else. But no, he said that it's the church's
here's
job.
the thing. I understand, like, I'm a Christian, I totally get that. But I just don't think it's appropriate at the moment. Right now, it's too much of a risk. If we're really that naive to think that ISIS won't send someone in with a clean slate into this country using refugees, I mean, I just don't think it's proper at this moment.
Yeah, so here's the counter issue to that, though. if we decide we have to take care of people that need it, especially Christians escaping persecution. It just, as a faith thing, I was talking with my grandma today, of all people, about
Oh,
this.
my grandma too. My grandpa.
talking about how it's our job as a global church to take care of these people that need the help, people that are being persecuted for their faith. And the problem is, it's very hard to do that safely right now because of the situation. So it is a sticky situation, and it's something that's very difficult to deal with, which is why I'm a huge proponent of let's just slow our roll a little bit, figure out how we can do this effectively, but then start bringing in the women and the children and the people that aren't posing as big of a threat. And more importantly, let's start trusting our system and its ability to find these terrorists and to find the people that are here to cause harm, because we've been successful at stopping plots. And so if we're able to know, even if, say, for example, and again, I'm not saying this is what I'm supporting, but say, for example, we were to say every refugee is going to be allowed to come into the United States. But the caveat is they're all going to be tracked and be using e-verify systems. And the second we lose our ability to keep track of these people, which I know it's the civil liberty discussion will come in at some point to this argument, but I think in this case it's fair to say they're not U.S. citizens, they are refugees, and we want to make sure that we're keeping track of them for their safety and for our safety. And when we lose track of them, we immediately devote our resources to finding who we've lost track of, and we figure out where are they, what are they up to, what's going on.
We send Liam Neeson after him, pretty much.
We what?
We send Liam Neeson after him.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that.
I'm
Take
behind that plan. 100%.
Yeah, but I just think I don't know. I feel like that's a decent way to deal with it. It's not the best way, but it is a way to help people that are in need while figuring out a way, and sooner rather than later, because they do need it at some point. And so I think that's a way to say, look, we're going to help these people out, and then we're going to have a way to combat, issues and prevent them from happening. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What's y'all's thoughts on that? Kind of, I'll let you guys take that.
Well,
Wherever you want.
Can I just jump in and say that the single hardest way to come to the United States is as a refugee.
Oh, I think
it requires a UN referral. It requires a vetting process. And even if, let's say, I heard some people on Twitter say that 20% of the refugees who want to come in like ISIS, they support them. So let's just say, for the sake of debate, that number is true, whether or not it actually is.
It came from Twitter, so probably not.
But let's just say it is. Why in the world would they come in as refugees? It's so much easier to abuse the visa system. It's so much easier to abuse different systems. I do not see the incentive at all for coming in as a refugee, unless you don't want to attack the United States until like 20 years from now, in which case that makes perfect sense. But I don't think jihad is that long term.
That is a good point. Maybe they're just that patient, but that is a good point, especially with how vulnerable our borders are. You would think that if they really wanted to enter the United States quickly and be undetected, mainly undetected off the books, they would go in through the southern border. And maybe that means that there is some legitimacy to Trump's wall plan, but yeah, that is interesting.
Trump 2016.
You heard it here.
Not echo that.
Oh man,
that's going on Twitter.
Yeah, I had a thought, and then someone said something with disgusting language on here. This is a family program. So yeah, here's why I think that there are ones that are posing as refugees. Because when you come in like that, and when they know that you're here and you're supposedly trusted, it's easier to do more. It's easier to it's easier than, you're not going to get in trouble for being here. If you come here illegally and it's somehow found out, you are going to be punished for that, well, theoretically, because there are laws that aren't followed, blah, 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 whatever, that debate, different time. But theoretically, if you come here illegally, you're going to get deported and you're going to be in trouble when you do that. So if you come here the right way, even though it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, first of all, if you're doing something that's going to end up costing you your own life, chances are you're going to want to wait a little bit to do that. You're going to want to push the end of your life off.
Some of them are racist, though.
Well, I've never spoken to anyone who has committed acts of jihad.
I don't think any of us
Obviously.
Yeah.
However, I've read.
Anyone on the
really
panel
good friends with
has
them.
spoken to someone?
If anyone's familiar with the author Joel Rosenberg, he writes a lot of books that have to do with kind of mostly the end time stuff, but he goes into a lot of Middle Eastern stuff, and one of the things he writes about is this sense of fear that jihadists have, and it's, do I want to go through with this? And I'm not, obviously he doesn't know either, but that's realistic to assume that there is a sense of fear. There is a thought that, nobody wants to willingly give up their life with 100% of their being like that. They're indoctrinated to do it, but there is human nature that comes in. So part of that is, that could be part of it. But I think the biggest thing is you want to be trusted. You want to be as close to your enemy, as buddy-buddy with them as you can before you do something. And that's what's incredibly scary. But it's all such an issue, and there is no simple answer. There's no end-all, be-all. There's no easy solution. It's such a complicated issue that's going to require a lot of communication. Unfortunately, right now we've got a president who doesn't want to communicate, who wants to just say the Republicans, and he names Republicans specifically, despite many Democrats coming out against, or not against, but they've come out on the same position as a lot of Republicans. But he's called out specifically Republicans, and he's made it a partisan issue. He said, they're afraid of orphans and widows. But there was a woman just arrested, or there was a woman who tried to blow herself up. I'm not sure if she did.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
But I remember hearing about that. Again, it was just one of the things all over Twitter. But there was a woman that had tried blowing herself up, may or may not have succeeded. But that's where the fear comes from, because there are people trying to do this, and they're indoctrinating children, and they're making women do these things. And it's absolutely horrible. And so there's no easy way to just sit there and say, look, this is the answer. And I think hopefully that's what we were able to kind of discuss and bring to the table. Obviously, all of us are available on Twitter. Some of the names are showing up on here. My Twitter handle is @NotKyleFoley. Ben and Brittany, I'll let you guys really quick kind of give your Twitter handles so people can find you and discuss this a little more.
I'm @BGreenAZ.
Wait, what? What?
Your Twitter handle.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Hers is showing
Mine's
up now.
appearing.
So. Yeah, we've had a little bit of technical difficulties with that. So
I just turned it off.
Yeah. So with that, we want to thank you guys for listening, bearing with us for the last hour, or the last 5 minutes if you tuned in just to catch the end, hoping I would say something stupid and embarrass myself. And joke's on you, it was Brittany who said Trump 2016.
I would like to point out, I do not support Trump. Let's get that out
All
right
right,
now.
time to stop the broadcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in. This Young Guns podcast obviously
I'm
brought to you by
losing followers.
This podcast is brought to you by OUTSET Magazine. Obviously, you can follow them at OUTSET Magazine. You can also follow us on Twitter at YoungGunsUSA. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/YoungGuns. If you have any questions, comments, concerns can be directed to Stephen Perkins. He will print them out, throw them in the trash can. It's a very intricate filing system we have. But we'd love to hear what you have to think about this. We'd love to keep the discussions going. I know a lot of us will be really active on Twitter tonight. We're typically pretty active. I made the joke that I'm on 22 hours a day. I'm sleeping / tweeting the other 2 hours of the day, which explains a lot of the things I say. So we are going to be active. We are going to be talking about this a lot. So we'd love to hear what you have to say. We'd love to hear your input. And once again, we just want to thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next week.